the Pulitzer Prize, the most coveted award in news photography. Hello, I'm Sam Waterston. Welcome to Moment of Impact, stories of the Pulitzer Prize photographs. Anyone who has used a camera knows that the difference between a good photograph and an extraordinary one depends on the subject and the photographer. Each year, the Pulitzer Board and the Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism honor the exceptional news photographs that result from this unique combination. Right now, we are going to celebrate 6 photojournalists who took prize-winning pictures. They all worked regular assignments, covering everyday events, until something extraordinary happened, and they captured a moment of impact that forever shaped our view of the world. Our first photographs were taken by Stanley Foreman, a newsman so committed to getting the story that he is never without a radio, a police scanner, and a beeper, even when he's sleeping. But one brutally hot July afternoon in 1975, Foreman's passion for his work collided with his own humanity. While covering a fire for the Boston Herald-American, he encountered a situation so heartbreaking that for the first time, he had to force himself to keep his finger on the shutter.
When I'm riding around and I hear a call, it doesn't have to be a fire, just something exciting. The adrenaline gets going, I get to think, how do I get there? And you're at an event, sometimes you're even the first one there. For me, it's like being on top of the world.
Foreman got hooked on news as a boy, chasing police cars and fire trucks. By age 30, he had become a seasoned news photographer, always on the alert for a breaking story.
July 22nd, 1975 was probably about 85, 90 degrees. 4:15 in the afternoon. Oh, boy.
Engine 33, lot of 17.
Over the scanner, at the assignment desk came a call for an outside fire matching 2 companies that don't normally work together, 33 and ladder 17. They're talking about people trapped in the building, and I ran down the steps, got into my car, and just started flying.
As Foreman headed out, fire companies from all over the city converged on Boston's Back Bay, where a small apartment house was burning furiously. Some of the firefighters who responded that day are still on duty in Boston.
We had heavy fire in the back, coming through the building, the smoke, and the heat of the building, because the building was attached on both sides. So we had a tremendous amount of heat, tremendous amount of fire.
It was just heavy, heavy smoke.
We had heavy smoke around floors.
Yeah, but the front was like twisters coming out.
And the floors are collapsing, and the stairways are disintegrating. We had a free burning fire in a building. So something you really don't see that often, something you don't want to be in.
The fire moved so fast, the firefighters suspected it had been set on purpose.
The third alarm, respond to the fire. Engine 8, engine 37 to the fire.
Inside the building, the firefighters searched for survivors in the worst conditions possible.
It's as if you had your eyes closed. Envision that you're going up someplace with your eyes closed, feeling on your hands and knees and crawling and listening for people.
As the firefighters braved the smoke and flames, the occupants escaped from the building, except 2 who were trapped on the top floor.
Rear of the building, kept calling for the ladder truck. Rear of the building, urgent, urgent. I come running down the alley, heavy smoke, heavy fire, and then I spotted them. A woman, a child, and they're standing there on the fire escape 10 feet from the fire itself. And they're standing there, and they're looking for help. And then all of a sudden, a firefighter, his name is Bob O'Neill, comes over the top.
Bobby's going across the roof. He hears the cries. He looks over. He jumps off the roof line to the fire escape.
Lowers himself onto the fire escape and pulls them to the corner.
O'Neill, a 25-year firefighting veteran, placed himself behind the young woman and child, protecting them from the fire with his thick rubber coat.
The problem he had was he couldn't get back in the building. The building was untenable then. He had nowhere to go.
He's waiting for the ladder truck. The ladder truck gets into position.
For O'Neill, it would be a routine rescue. He would climb onto the ladder, the young woman would hand him the child. O'Neill would then help the young woman onto the ladder. Within minutes, they would all be safe.
I've got 2 cameras, 35mm lens, a 135. I'm looking for the best angle. So I climb up the bed of the ladder truck. Nobody's bothering me, no one's throwing me off, and I'm just shooting pictures.
Suddenly, another man appeared. It was Joe Green, a traffic helicopter pilot, leaning over the edge of the roof, offering help.
The firefighter looked up on the roof of a burning building, and he saw a bearded, shirtless man who said, "Hand me the baby. I have a helicopter."
O'Neill could not hand the child to a stranger. Besides, the ladder was almost within his reach. O'Neill stretched his arm to grab it.
And all of a sudden, boom, it just crashes. Everything is falling, and I'm shooting and shooting. The metal is going everywhere, and I'm just focusing. I kept thinking, just keep shooting.
Through sheer will, Foreman kept his finger on the shutter. Then he stopped.
Like a bell went off in my head. I didn't want to see them hit. And I turned around, and when I turned back, I realized I couldn't have seen them hit anyways because they fell behind this fenced area.
One of the fire escape's iron supports had collapsed, and Foreman believed that all 3 people had fallen to the ground. But when he turned around, he saw Bob O'Neill dangling from the ladder.
He was like a monkey holding on, and he swung himself up with all his gear and everything.
The firefighter finally made it to safety. Miraculously, the little girl sustained only minor injuries. But despite the efforts of the rescue team, the young woman did not survive. Foreman made his way over to a stunned O'Neill.
And I went over to see him, and I remember him standing there, and he was going 2 more seconds, 2 more seconds. He was so intense, he was so hurt.
Shaken by the tragedy he had just witnessed, Foreman headed back to the newspaper.
I got in the office, and my boss was sitting there in his office, and I said, "Maya, I just made these pictures. If they don't come out, I won't be in tomorrow. As a matter of fact, I might never come back again."
Not knowing whether he had captured the remarkable experience on film, Foreman began developing the photographs.
Put it on the light board, and everybody was looking at the pictures, looking at the negatives.
At 1 a.m. the next morning, on his way to yet another fire, Foreman stopped to buy a copy of the Boston Herald-American. There he found his photographs. Foreman's photographs inspired tighter fire laws in cities around the world, including Boston. The photographs motivated Foreman to keep doing what he does best, taking pictures.
All through the years, I daydream about pictures. You daydream about making a picture that has the impact that those pictures have.
Stanley Foreman's photographs generated enormous controversy. Some readers complained that the pictures were sensational. Others felt that they portrayed the fragile nature of life and the reality of human tragedy. Foreman and his colleagues thought the photographs represented the peak of his career. But the very next year, the 31-year-old photographer took a picture at an anti-busing rally in Boston that garnered him a second Pulitzer Prize. The Pulitzer Prize was created in 1911 by newspaper publisher Joseph Pulitzer to reward excellence in journalism, drama, and literature. The first photography prize was awarded in 1942, 9 years before our next story. The setting, a brilliant October day in 1951. Fans cheered as two undefeated football teams collided on an Oklahoma playing field. It was a time of optimism in post-war America. The country was booming. Opportunities abounded. But beneath the confidence and prosperity lay profound racial tensions which would come furiously to life as Drake University and Oklahoma and A&M battled it out in a spirited football game. Donald Oldtang and John Robinson photographed the events on the Oklahoma playing field that day, a moment of impact that laid bare one of the most divisive social issues in America. As he traveled to assignments for the Des Moines Register, photographer Donald Oldtang teamed up with John Robinson. They flew a single-engine Beechcraft Bonanza, which Oldtang piloted himself.
We had flown almost 2.5 years covering Big Ten games, so I'd gotten to the point where I really thought I was flying in a big-time operation. We could cover games anywhere in the country that we wanted.
October 20th, 1951. The Drake University Bulldogs and the Oklahoma Aggies met on the Stillwater, Oklahoma playing field. Both the Aggies and the Bulldogs were undefeated. The Bulldogs were also fielding one of college football's most potent on-field weapons, player number 43, halfback Johnny Bright.
We had speculated as to what Bright's reception would be. Bright was in a very special position at that game. He was going onto a field where a black man wasn't really accepted.
Johnny Bright was a two-time NCAA total offense champion who had gained more yards than any player in collegiate history. He was one of 6 African Americans on the Drake team. Drake's competition, the Aggies, was an all-white team. At that time, Oklahoma A&M, like many Southern colleges, did not admit African American students. This created tensions for athletes and fans alike. Ray Island was a friend of Bright's who ran on the Drake track team.
It was a horrible time for us. We were an integrated team in a kind of a segregated conference. The schools didn't even admit Afro-American students at the time. We had great teams at Drake, and that always kind of overcomes the sadness of what we had to face on the field.
The South was still racially segregated in the 1950s. Integrated Northern teams had to make special arrangements for their African-American athletes when they played in the South.
We couldn't even eat and sleep in the hotels where the other athletes were. But I had warned John before going down there that I'd run track there in the spring, and it might be a little hazardous.
Despite his friend's warning, Johnny Bright took to the field with the rest of his teammates. One of them was fullback Gene Maycomber.
John was 6'1", 210 pounds, leading ground gainer in America, black, and we had to play in the South. And I can remember the day before the game on campus, words to the effect that the black guy would not finish the game. He knew he was a marked man.
Just before kickoff, Oldtang and Robinson took up positions high in the stands, each using his own specially modified equipment.
I had this camera to use, which is a howitzer. It takes one photograph per play and covers about half of the field.
John Robinson was using a movie camera that had been reconfigured to take a series of still-frame photographs. Only minutes into one of the most hotly contested games of the season, the Bulldog center snapped the ball to Johnny Bright. Bright handed off to fullback Gene Makeover. The play ended on the Bulldogs' 39-yard line.
I'd watched the ball player who had gotten the ball handled to him, made an exposure at that time. Much to my surprise, at the end of the play, Bright was lying on the ground, unconscious as it turned out.
I was carrying the ball. I didn't see the hit, but I saw the celebration after the hit when he handed the ball off to me. I was a fullback. Instead of completing his spin and going off to the side and faking, he would take a couple of steps and stop and look back at where the ball was.
Bright's stance made him a perfect target for defensive end Will Banks Smith, who hit Bright squarely in the jaw. In the stands, nobody knew what had happened.
And we both looked at one another and wondered whether or not anyone had seen any specific blow struck. As we got ready for the next play, we were still saying, I wonder what happened. And Bright got back and threw a pass for a touchdown. Drake was ahead 6-0, then 7-0.
Bright kept up his relentless offense, but Will Banks Smith continued his attacks, hitting Bright repeatedly in the face. Finally, Bright went down for good, buried under a pile of Aggie players. No whistle had been blown, no referee had made a call. The fans, the press, and the officials had all been watching the ball, and Bright had not had the ball.
Bright, at that point, had been knocked unconscious 4 times. He was taken off the field and never entered the game again.
He was very badly hurt. His jaw was wired together for almost 2 months. He couldn't eat, he couldn't talk, he couldn't even express what had happened to him. And they did intentionally plan to get John out of that game. There's no doubt in my mind about that at all.
With Bright out of the game, Oklahoma went on to beat Drake 27-14. Oltang and Robinson raced to their plane. With Oltang at the controls, they flew back to Des Moines, wondering if their cameras had recorded what their eyes had failed to see.
We were met by people rushing to us saying, "What have you got?" And we're saying, "We're not sure." I went into a dark room to handle my 4x5 film, and I can recall a picture editor looking over my shoulder, and I was bringing the hangers out of the water. I said, "I can see an elbow in Bright's face." I'm still amused at his response, which was, "Have you got anything more?" I thought I'd had quite a bit there.
In the next morning's Register, Oltang and Robinson's photographs splashed the shocking chronology of Bright's injury across the sports section's entire front page. The photographs caused an enormous sensation.
The racial angle captured the imagination of all sports followers in the country. Nobody had realized that a black man could be pummeled the way he was and deliberately run out of the game.
In protest, Drake University withdrew from the Missouri Valley Conference. It also severed athletic relations with Oklahoma A&M. The assault on Bright changed college football. Players began wearing mouthpieces and face masks. New NCAA rules required that players be suspended for flagrantly rough play or unsportsmanlike behavior. In 1952, Oltang and Robinson won the Pulitzer Prize. John Robinson died in 1972. Today, Donald Oltang speaks of their groundbreaking photographs with characteristic modesty.
People ask me about winning a Pulitzer Prize, and I say it's wonderful, but I think I was just in the right place at the right time.
The country lost a great athlete after the incident at Stillwater, Oklahoma. Turning down offers from the pros, Johnny Bright left the United States and went to play for the Canadian Football League. America has changed dramatically since 1951. Diversity is now recognized as essential to our future. But issues of racial and social injustice are very much alive, though often buried until we are forced to confront them. Much like the moment of impact uncovered by Donald Oultang and John Robinson. More than 100 photographers have been honored with the Pulitzer Prize. To qualify, a photograph or a series of photographs must first appear in a regularly published U.S. newspaper. Some of the most powerful Pulitzer photographs depict brutality, war, political unrest, inner-city violence. But evil and horror are everywhere. Just down the street, behind the white picket fence, can lurk the unknown, the predator, the abuser, the killer. As a young photojournalist, Tom Kelly had witnessed his share of the world's violence, so he decided to raise his family in the safety of a small town. He never imagined that one of the most shocking moments of his career would take place just minutes from his home.
I haven't taken these negatives out more than 2 or 3 times in the last 20 years. You know, and I look through some of them, it's hard to believe that I took them. You never know what you're going to get into. You never know what the call is going to be. Just like that day that Doug and I responded down the Saratoga Road, we knew that this one was a bad one. But it's not fair to say that just because something this horrible happened around here that this is a bad place.
It's hard to imagine anything bad happening in Pottstown, Pennsylvania. It is the quintessential American town.
This is a great town. I love this town.
Kelly has covered Pottstown's high school graduations, the local 4-H club, and 4th of July parades down Main Street. But he was also on the scene of a story so shocking that local residents are still talking about it over 20 years later. May 10th, 1978, Tom Kelly was on his way to the Pottstown Mercury, where he worked as a staff photographer.
At approximately 1:25 p.m., this station received a call relative to a hostage-type situation at the home of Joseph Grice, Saratoga Road, Pottstown.
A call came over the police radio. It was kind of a chilling report. I took off for there right away. I didn't know what I was going to face. Got my cameras ready, made sure they were loaded. Sometimes you got to be emotionally ready, you know, just kind of getting yourself together, racing up to the scene.
Can you describe very briefly for the WCAU listeners what the scene looks like?
An elderly woman laying on the lawn, badly cut, bleeding. Inside, the wife, the unborn baby, and the little girl, and the man that held them hostage and threatened police outside.
When he got to the house, Kelly recognized Officer Doug Weaver.
I was a young police officer. I was the only officer on duty that day and had received a call to respond to the residents for a disturbance.
The address was a farmhouse on Saratoga Road, where Richard and Joe Grice lived with their wives, their children, and a grandmother, Anna Gresco.
Mrs. Anna Gresco, age 71, was found on the front lawn of the residence.
What Kelly and Weaver saw when they got to the scene was so terrible that although they both still live in the area, this is the first time they have returned to the house on Saratoga Road.
Mercury box there.
Right. And I remember walking up not knowing exactly what had occurred, and there was still an individual inside that was a threat to all of us.
Kelly began snapping photographs. The ambulance attendants, the wounded grandmother, people he had known and worked with for years.
I knew the medics. I mean, you know everybody around here. You know, you see them every day, and everybody was quite upset. And more police started arriving.
There were probably 25 police officers here initially, most of them armed, several with bulletproof vests, and they completely surrounded the house.
Word spread quickly among those waiting outside. Richard Greist was holding his pregnant wife and 2 young daughters hostage inside the house. There were rumors that he had a knife, a gun, but nobody knew what was really going on.
We didn't hear anything. We heard nothing. We didn't know if somebody was going to shoot at us.
Despite warnings from the officers, Tom Kelly crawled up close.
I got to the front of this one police car. Just moments later, the front door opened. What I saw gives me chills till this day. For over a year, I couldn't talk about this. It was too horrible.
The little 5-year-old girl walked out the front door and down the path in what I might just say would be the most horrible thing I ever saw.
Why was it horrible?
She was all cut up in the face and head, and she was bleeding. And she was saying, "Don't hurt my daddy."
I couldn't take any pictures of the little girl, and I don't know why. I always felt that you could take pictures of anything and not use them if they were too terrible. But I couldn't take a picture of her that day, and then you stepped in. You ran out from behind that tree over there and picked her up in just one motion.
What Weaver saw was terrible. Beth Ann's father had cut her face, her eyes, and yet...
And you had a little smile on your face.
I think it was a smile of relief that we knew that she was alive. The warmest moment of the whole afternoon was when I knew that she was safe from whatever danger was inside.
As Weaver handed the injured little girl to the medics, Kelly captured another telling moment.
And there was a state trooper reaching out like he wanted to help the little girl. He was just so overwhelmed with looking at her. He had this look of anguish on his face.
Beth Ann had escaped the terror. Her younger sister Angela had too. But their mother Janice, 7 months pregnant, was still trapped somewhere inside.
And after Beth Ann came out of the house, the police regrouped. I could see that they were going to rush the house.
Kelly had already shot half the film in each of his 2 cameras. Sensing something momentous was about to happen, he decided to change roles.
I reloaded my cameras and positioned myself right in front of that one unmarked police car. The door opened again. The police rushed the house. Found Richard Greist. They grabbed him, and I have one picture of him at the front door.
One of the police officers seized Greist and began running him away from the house.
And Richard was yelling, "Hold me, I'm afraid." And at that point, just a split second, I'm putting the camera on my shoulder. Richard Greist had broken free. He's wild, running towards me. When he was 4 or 5 feet away, without looking up, without seeing him, the camera was cocked just the way it is now. The picture's crooked.
Richard Greist's moment of freedom was brief. He ran just a few yards across Sanatoga Road before the police recaptured him. Greist was soon taken away, leaving Kelly to discover the fate of the victims. Greist's daughters and the grandmother, Anna Gresko, had survived the assault. Greist's pregnant wife, Janice, was not as fortunate.
The officers went into the home, went up to the second floor bedroom, and they found this man's wife, Janice, and she was apparently dead at the time.
What I saw inside the house was it was grotesque, it was terrible. It's even painful now to describe. The mutilated body of the wife. I dreamed about what I had seen that day and have had dreams since then. To this day, I still have a lot of thoughts that I haven't been able to really deal with. Things that I saw, people just shouldn't have to look at.
One of the more difficult times of the day was when I saw Janice's mom and dad, who worked with me at the Mercury, standing with a state police investigator. They had to go in and identify their daughter, who was the murdered woman.
Kelly spent hours more photographing the scene at Saratoga Road. When he finally got back to the Mercury, his lab assistant was already developing Kelly's film.
And I go in the darkroom. I looked at this photograph, and I asked John, who took that picture? He said, you did. That was on your roll.
Although he didn't even remember taking the picture, Kelly had documented the most bizarre and threatening situation of his life. The next morning, its significance began to sink in.
All the front page pictures on all the local newspapers and Philly papers had the pictures in that I took. It's kind of remarkable, you know, it's starting to sink in that these pictures that I took were pretty good.
The photographs that Tom Kelly took that day won journalism's most prestigious prize. But it's not only the accolades that he remembers.
For days and months and even now, I still feel the moments that I was down there at that scene. I've thought about it at night. It's affected me a great deal. It's something that won't go away. It'll affect me forever. I continually shoot pictures in this area. And they're the type of pictures that you wish you were rewarded for. It's good to win the top photo prize in the world, but I wish it was for something else.
In 1980, Richard Greist was found not guilty by reason of insanity. He was committed to Norristown State Hospital, where he remains to this day. Though if he is ever declared sane, he might walk out a free man. Tom Kelly still lives not far from the house on Saratoga Road. The Pulitzer Prize-winning photographs he took that day reveal an astonishing range of human emotion, the most horrific and heroic aspects of our own humanity. The Vietnam War was one of the most polarizing in our nation's history. A devastating campaign fought in the jungles of Southeast Asia and in the media at home. Whether they were photographing American soldiers under fire or anti-war protesters at home, photojournalists brought images of the war into American homes and paid the price. 16 American photographers lost their lives. But one of the most important photographs of the war wasn't taken in Vietnam. Associated Press photographer Sal Vieder left his Northern California home one March morning in 1973 for a routine assignment. By the end of the day, he had taken a picture that symbolized the most anxiously awaited moment of an entire nation. Ironically, Vieder had spent much of the war photographing anti-war protesters.
Are you prepared to take the constitutional oath?
I am.
I think of myself as a news photographer. My feeling has always been that I'm here to record history, not to make it or manipulate it.
You have to anticipate action. Everything looks routine, and then suddenly all hell breaks loose.
In 1973, the Associated Press sent Sal Vider to Southeast Asia. The war was over. The 591 Americans held captive by the North Vietnamese were finally being released.
The Vietnam assignment first came in 73 at the prisoner of war release. I was sent to Saigon for about 2 to 3 months, where we waited for the first POWs to return.
Colonel Robert Sturm was one of those POWs. He had served in Vietnam since 1967. At the time of his release, he had not seen his children in almost 6 years.
I'm Colonel Robert L. Sturm, United States Air Force, retired. I was shot down leading a mission in the bridge at Hanoi. And as I was drifting down in a parachute, on the ground there were maybe 200 or so people. They all had guns, and they were all shooting at me.
Miraculously, Sturm survived, only to be incarcerated in a North Vietnamese prison. Back home, Colonel Sturm's 4 young children endured a long and painful wait.
We didn't know what was happening. I got the impression several times during his absence that he was dead and that we would not see him again.
I was shot 3 times, in the neck, in the shoulder, and the clavicle. I wasn't able to see because of the way they blindfolded you. And even when they took the blindfold off, it had deformed my eyeballs.
We wrote letters every week, even though we never knew if they got to my dad.
In front of all these journalists, they wanted me to denounce President Johnson. I was obligated to give name, rank, service number, and date of birth. And that's all I did.
I'm always optimistic, and I figured he would come back, but we were always told he might not make it back.
Fighter pilots are normally very optimistic. They believe everything's going to be better tomorrow. We'd ask one another, when do you think we'll get out? Oh, it'll be next month. If somebody would have said 5.5 or 6 years in one lump sum, that would have been difficult.
During those years that he was gone, I grew up, and it was very difficult because he wasn't there for those many years, keeping me in line and giving me some guidance.
Finally, Sturm's excruciating captivity drew to a close.
There was a pair of black shoes, a pair of trousers, and a shirt. The day that we were released, they brought in the clothes and we put them on for the first time.
All of our American POWs are on their way home.
After their release, the POWs were flown directly to the Philippines, then to Hawaii, and on to Travis Air Force Base in Northern California. 25 years later, Sal Vider returned again to Travis, where he greeted Colonel Sturm and his children.
No, well, you and Lori would be there.
Sal.
Hi there.
Colonel, good to see you. Did you know at the time when you took the picture that you had captured something very special?
Oh, we knew we had a good picture. There was no question about it. That day was overcast, no shadows. The light was beautiful. The Air Force had set up a bullpen for photographers, and there were about 40 or 50 of us. To see them come home brought tears to a lot of people's eyes, and some of the photographers were pretty well shaken up, as I was too. I mean, it was hard to concentrate, but I think by the mere fact that we had a job to do helped us out a lot emotionally.
I remember the morning Dad came home and the Air Force sent a car for us.
It was an Air Force blue station wagon that brought us out.
We kind of circled right behind the airplane as it was coming in to taxi.
We had our nice clothes on, all happy, ready to go.
We sat in the car and it must have taken 10 minutes for them to open the door.
I was kind of afraid you wouldn't recognize us. Because we were little when you left.
How would I not recognize you?
I mean, didn't you guys think that, Raj?
Yeah, I was about to.
Yeah, I didn't think you
Oh,
knew
you were
it
taller
before.
than
I
that.
thought we could come running up to you and you would, like, not know it was us.
Get away, kid.
Colonel Sturm, why, he was the last man off the plane. And being the commanding officer, why, he stopped and addressed the crowd.
When I got off and I saluted the commander, whoever it was, and walked down.
And my dad came out. I could tell he was looking around.
Thank you for this enthusiastic reception.
And when he started to talk to the crowd, well, I just turned around and started shooting the crowd behind us.
God bless you. God bless America.
That was
and
it.
Then you turned toward
Yes.
the family that was running towards you
Yeah.
from the, after they'd gotten from the staff car.
I don't know how I was told that they were behind me. I thought they would be out in front.
Finally, they said, okay, you can get out of the car now. And we all just kind of jumped out and started running.
There was motion. The family had started to run toward him, and that's what caught my eye.
It was just this overwhelming feeling that he finally made it back.
It took Robert Sturm almost 6 years to get home to his family. His children are still coming to terms with their father's ordeal.
My kids do not know everything that went on. I didn't think at the time my children were prepared to hear that. I'm still not sure they're prepared to hear all of it. Welcome aboard. You've never been aboard a C-141?
I've never been on here.
Several times,
This is
actually.
really cool.
This is very cool.
Actually, I never thought I'd be on a C-141.
I never thought I would be on this kind of an aircraft. It just fills me with so much pride that our dad came home. And this was the kind of plane who brought him back to freedom.
Colonel Sturm vividly remembers the plane ride home to his family.
When we came out of Hanoi, it was configured with a comfort pallet that's about 30 or 40 feet long that has airline-type seats. They really did not know what kind of conditioning, so they thought they'd have stretchers for everybody if we needed stretchers. Came from Hanoi to Clark, and then I spent 3 days in the hospital at Clark before they brought me back here. They wanted to make sure I did not have any bad bugs to give you all.
When Dad came home, I was almost 16. I was a teenager and I knew everything. There's a little bit of a curve there where I had to learn to let Dad back in and accept his authority.
I was really excited to see him. Once I saw him, it was different. He shrank. Or that's what it felt like to me.
There was a lot of turmoil about Vietnam. A lot of people didn't agree with our dad. When somebody can come back and survive what he did, it just makes you humble.
Heck, he's larger than life. He's my hero.
Poignantly, in Sal Viter's photograph, the hero was anonymous.
My face was not seen. It was just the back of my head. I was a symbol. And it is the most enduring of all the homecoming pictures.
For Sal Viter, the award helped recognize the work of a lifetime.
Being awarded the Pulitzer is a great honor and one that I feel takes a great deal of responsibility. It's a heck of a prize. It also lent a lot of meaning to the work that I've done over the years. Even though it's just one picture, it sort of validates your career.
There were few heroes' welcomes for those who fought in Vietnam. U.S. soldiers returned to a country that was determined to forget the war and those who'd fought it. But Sal Veder's photograph humanized the returning servicemen, immortalizing a bittersweet moment in America's painful saga in Vietnam, showing a family and a nation ready to move on. Although the Pulitzer Prize competition is open to all photographers, including amateurs, most winners are experienced photojournalists. These professionals understand that when they arrive at the scene of an accident or a crime, they must balance their duty as news photographers with the needs of the rescue teams and the victim. Photographer Annie Wells faced that precarious situation one rainy winter day in 1996. In her 8 years at the Press Democrat in Santa Rosa, California, Wells had become a seasoned news photographer. But as she stood on a muddy hillside, her camera trained on a raging creek, Wells was forced to make difficult professional choices while watching a life-threatening drama unfold before her. February in Northern California. Drenching rain, sweeping floods, heart-stopping rescues. In this county alone, winter storms have killed 10 people during the past decade. So when Annie Wells received word of a flood rescue, it was with some dread that she loaded her cameras and hurried over.
When I first got on the scene, there were several fire trucks out on the street. And I came to look and see what my view would be down the creek and realized I couldn't see very far.
Wells learned that 2 teenage girls had fallen into the rain-swollen Matanzas Creek. Firefighters had already rescued one teenager, but as Wells hurried to the scene, she knew that the second, Marjolin Pasica, was still trapped in the raging waters.
I thought that I needed to be as close to the water as possible to get a good shot of the rescue.
Wells quickly surveyed the area, looking for the best position from which to shoot.
And I saw up the hill there was this line of firefighters, and I knew that's where I wanted to be, and I thought they're never going to let me be there. I didn't want to get in their way. I didn't want to ask their permission because I didn't want them to say no, but I made eye contact with every single one of them so that they knew I was here.
Wells needed to take good photographs without interfering with the rescue team.
When I got here, she was in the water alone. My heart is racing. It's an incredible scene. I know I'm seeing something that I've never seen before. This girl is in peril of losing her life, and there's this whole crew of people that are trying to save her.
The firefighters could not reach Marjolin. She was too far from the bank. Someone would have to go into the frigid water to rescue her. Engine Company Number 1 was called in to assist. Firefighter Don Lopez had been specially trained in water emergency rescue. By the time he arrived, Marjolin had already been in the cold water for almost 30 minutes.
Hypothermia setting in, hysteria. Time was of the essence. Water was cold. Water was about 15 feet higher than what it is now. Water was rushing. Marjolin, the victim, was in the water screaming like crazy.
I saw 2 firefighters setting up a net across a culvert that was almost filled with water, presumably to catch somebody's body when it came downstream. I was carrying 2 cameras, one with a wider angle lens and one with a more telephoto lens. So I got some tight pictures of her face. That's what I had to see. I had to see this girl's face. And I also shot some wide-angle shots so you could see just how big this creek was.
Working fast, the firefighters anchored a rescue line between 2 trees. Then Lopez got ready to enter the water.
I hooked myself into the rope, took a couple steps into the water, tried to swim out as far as I could. and I eventually make my way down to the tree that she is connected to. I'm trying to find out why she's trapped. She says that she's freezing, she can't move. So I tried to lift her, tried to move her around, and it wasn't working.
The current was so strong that it yanked Lopez away and hurled him down the river, leaving Marjolin alone in the water.
She started screaming. She said that she couldn't hold on any longer, that she was going to let go. She screamed at me not to take pictures of her.
Wells felt intense compassion for the girl who was trapped in the raging waters. But she didn't give up her role as journalist, no matter how painful the circumstances.
Sometimes if somebody asks you not to take a picture, you won't. But this was a time when I couldn't. I had to do it.
In the meantime, Lopez jumped back into the water, carrying a harness so he could secure Marjolin to a line.
I'm trying in the process of hooking this truckman's belt that I have around her waist. I hear this scream that actually lifts the hair on the back of my neck.
The most incredible sound I've ever heard in my life. It was this guttural, animal howl and scream. I thought to myself, that has got to be her mother. No one on earth would make a sound like that except for the mother of this child.
I ran up to the edge of the hillside to see what was going on, and the first thing I saw was my daughter's face, up to her neck in water, out in the middle of this creek. It's something that you never want to have to experience, ever. You never think that you're going to see one of your children in danger.
The situation was agonizing. A young woman in jeopardy, but nobody could reach her, including Lopez, who was again swept away by the fierce current. With the outcome increasingly uncertain, a sheriff's helicopter hovered overhead, ready to drop a rescue line down to the water.
My focus was completely on her, and at that point, I knew that one of two things would happen. That girl would live, or she would drown. It was extraordinarily intense.
Marjolin was weakening rapidly. At times, she was pushed completely under the water. Her mother and the rest of the crowd watched helplessly from the bank.
She'd been in the water for about 40 minutes. She was slurring her words. We didn't really think she had much time left.
I took my telephoto lens and just trained it on Margie and waited until whatever was going to happen to her happened.
Knowing he had strength for just one more attempt, Lopez plunged into the icy water and fought his way to Marjolin. Finally, he got the harness around her. Lopez let go. Marjolin felt herself being pulled toward the safety of the bank.
I didn't think it was going to work. And I was just scared that we were both going to be washed down and that I would die.
Despite the enormous obstacles, Don Lopez was determined to succeed.
One of the things that I always had going through my mind is everything's going to be okay. We're going to do everything that we can to get you out of here. I don't care what it takes. You know, everything's going to be okay.
I was just so relieved and so cold and so shocked. I just remember being safe, knowing that I was going to live, knowing that everything was going to be okay.
For Marjolin and her mother, the nightmare was over. As Annie Wells snapped her final photographs, she realized they portrayed a tragic accident and a dramatic rescue.
I couldn't believe what I'd witnessed, and I was sort of giddy. And I went down to the firefighters. I just said to them, I can't believe what I just saw. You guys just saved that girl's life. A few of them looked up at me with these funny little grins, and they knew, too, that they had just done something really, really, really extraordinary and remarkable.
The rescue team had done their job. Annie Wells had done hers. In both cases, the results were remarkable.
I knew that I had taken the best news picture I'd ever taken in my life.
The very next day, Wells was out in a helicopter, photographing more floods. Annie Wells shares the light with the great women photojournalists. These are women who have endured the rigors of battle, the uncertainty of political upheaval, the tremors of natural disasters, all in the name of news photography. Some have been recognized with Pulitzers, some have not. But all have aspired to be where the action is, to record the truth in what they see, to make sure they get the shot. For one shining moment, Americans had a bright young president and an idealistic vision of the future. Bob Jackson was a part of that moment. As a young photographer for the Dallas Times-Herald, Jackson was sent out to cover a joyful gathering, only to be caught in one of the most sorrowful events in American history. It all started when Bob Jackson was assigned to photograph John F. Kennedy on his visit to Dallas, Texas, one gleaming autumn morning in 1963.
And the President and Mrs. Kennedy have arrived at Dallas Love Field.
When President Kennedy and his wife Jacqueline disembarked, Bob Jackson was ready. It was the biggest assignment of his young career.
I'd only been at the paper 3 years, so I was pretty green, pretty new at it all. It was a really exciting time.
Determined to get good coverage, Jackson jockeyed for position in the excited throng.
And here comes the President now.
Despite the frenzied atmosphere, Jackson kept his focus, always alert for the next shot. Minutes later, Jackson was riding through the streets of Dallas in President Kennedy's motorcade.
On that morning of the 22nd, I was in the 8th car, I believe the 8th car, in the motorcade.
Needing photos for its afternoon edition, the Times-Herald had arranged for Jackson to hand his exposed film to a reporter who would take it back to the newspaper.
I unloaded my camera. I put the film in an envelope and tossed it out to him, and he was standing right about here. And then we heard the first shot. Second and third shots were closer together. I just happened to look up to the book depository to the 6th floor, and I saw two men leaning out of the 5th floor window, looking up above. And that's when I saw the rifle on the ledge being drawn in.
Only 5 eyewitnesses saw the rifle, and Jackson was one of them. It was the moment of a lifetime, but he didn't have his camera ready.
The camera that I had with a long lens had no film in it. Now I'm still trying to figure out how to load my camera in a hurry. The scene that I saw here, confusion, people running, covering up their kids. I knew somebody was shooting at the president. I didn't know he was hit.
From Dallas, Texas, the flash, apparently official, President Kennedy died at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time, 2 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, some 38 minutes ago.
The country was overwhelmed by shock and mourning. Fighting his own grief and despair, Jackson proceeded to Parkland Hospital, where Kennedy's body lay.
It was very depressing to realize that I missed several pictures that would have been of historical value.
Descriptions on the suspects are similar.
As events continued to unfold, Jackson stayed right on top of them. He headed for Dallas Police Headquarters, where a suspect was already in custody.
Lee Harvey Oswald
was charged with the president's assassination.
Police have traced
the name of a man who is being held.
the life of the President of the United States.
Disarmed him, handcuffed him. Lee Harvey Oswald, OSWALD.
Did you kill the president?
No, I've not been charged with that. In fact, nobody has said that to me yet.
The next day, Saturday, was Jackson's day off. He was determined to pursue the story. He showed up at police headquarters, cameras ready.
I was up here at the police station fighting the crowd. These halls were just crammed with people. It made it hard to even click the shutter.
The assassination had attracted high-powered journalists from around the world. Jackson squeezed in among them, searching for images to clarify the situation for a grieving public.
This is the wife of Oswald and his mother. They have been in the Detective Bureau for quite some time.
At last, he got close to Oswald's wife, Marina, and his mother, Marguerite.
They were waiting for the elevator to open after they'd been questioned.
Now you can see a crowd of reporters by the elevator here on the third floor.
And I got between them and the elevator door.
On Sunday, tensions were still running high as the media descended again on police headquarters. Jackson was right in the thick of it, intent on photographing Oswald as he was transferred to the county jail.
The jail was a pretty tight ship, and I felt like in the basement of the police station that we might have our only chance to get a picture of Lee Harvey Oswald.
A lone policeman stood outside guarding the entrance.
I walked right in. There was no security to speak of. Nobody checked my press pass or anything.
This is the scene in the basement of the Dallas Police Headquarters. And it is through this corridor of newsmen, photographers, and policemen that Lee Oswald will be brought to a vehicle for...
I decided that the best place to shoot from would be somewhere right in here, because they were going to be bringing him out that door. Of course, the double doors weren't there. So my plan was to shoot a picture as they brought him out into the open space. And I pre-focused on about 10 feet where I knew that he would be in an open area. I would be able to get a clean shot. They said, "Here he comes." And as they brought him out, he was handcuffed to two officers.
Being let out by Captain Fritz. There is the picture. There is Lee Oswald.
As soon as he stepped into the open area, I was aware that somebody was stepping out from my right, and my first reaction was, this guy's getting in my way. Ruby took about 2 steps and fired.
There is the picture. There is Lee Oswald.
I guess I fired about the same time.
There is the picture. There is Lee Oswald. Now, panic here in the basement of Dallas Police has been shot. Oswald has been shot.
Oswald just let out this very loud moan. I mean, it was a sound I'd never heard. I mean, it was the real thing. Then it was bedlam.
He has been shot. Oswald has been shot. The shot came from a man wearing a black hat.
The policeman was shoving me back, had his hand over my camera.
Detectives have their guns drawn. The situation is now that Lee Harold Oswald has been shot. Here comes Oswald. He is ashen and unconscious at this time, now being...
Overcoming the crush of reporters and policemen, Jackson took one more telling frame.
I was able to see the wound when they put him in the ambulance. Just a little hole, no blood. was right in the gut. Went through his liver and spleen. I guess he bled to death internally.
Jackson and other journalists had been so close to the shooting that they were detained as witnesses. Jackson spent anxious hours waiting to get his film to the darkroom.
I thought I had something good. I wasn't sure what it was going to look like until I looked at the film. But I felt like I had a good picture. When I walked into the newsroom, everybody said, "Oh, do you have anything?" Boy, that was... Talk about pressure. When I held the film up to the light and looked at it, it looked good to me, and it looked sharp. And I remember letting out a yell. I said, "Yeah, I got something good."
After 3 days of relentless effort, Jackson had captured a moment of enormous impact.
I was sorry that it all happened in Dallas, but I'm glad I was able to record some of it. I think it took a long time for it to soak in, you know, the magnitude of what happened here.
Bob Jackson was so close to the events surrounding JFK's assassination that he was interviewed by the Warren Commission. He was a unique observer who made us all witnesses to that tragic November weekend, bringing us face to face with the death of a president and the harsh end of our youthful dreams. When the photographers in this program raised their cameras and took their prize-winning photographs, they captured a moment that changed the destiny of a single person or transformed the lives of millions. Their dramatic experiences shattered the detachment that often separates photographers and their subjects, forever changing the way they see their profession and themselves. Each of their Pulitzer Prize-winning photographs chronicles a unique human experience, preserving a moment of impact, horrifying or enlightening, that tells us more about our world and the way we live in it. These are only 6 of their stories. There are more to come.